More findings that show that Teresa Halbach never left Stephen Avery's Wisconsin property on October 31st, 2005. Today on The Jim Hagerty Show. Welcome back, everybody. We are here for another special report because Convicting a Murderer is now 8 episodes in on DailyWire Plus. Of course, Convicting a Murderer is the 10-part rebuttal to the Netflix documentary Making a Murderer. And again, fair disclosure, I have a role in Convicting a Murderer. After Making a Murderer dropped almost 8 years ago, I reported extensively on the aftermath for various publications while investigating the murder of Teresa Halbach and whether Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey were framed for the crime. And my investigative anecdotes are sprinkled throughout the rebuttal series. Now, we rebooted the show last month with an editorial, my belief that Convicting a Murderer uncovers what Making a Murderer left out. I also reviewed how cell tower data and phone records suggest that Teresa Halbach died at the Avery salvage yard on Halloween 2005, and I promised a part 2. Well, folks, this is part 2. Let's dive right in, because now that episode 8 of Convicting a Murderer has dropped, there is a lot to unpack. Now, if you haven't watched Convicting a Murderer episode 8, you can jump over there, watch that, and come back and join the conversation. I will be here. But I will just say, as a journalist, after watching Making a Murderer, I was left scratching my head a little bit because, as a reporter, watching that docuseries was an experience. It was interesting to say the least. I'm from the region up there. I'm not from the Manitowoc area. I'm from the Upper Peninsula, just north of Manitowoc, north of Green Bay, about an hour and a half on the Wisconsin border. And I tell you, everybody, this was a case. Everybody who was anybody who turned on the news back then in 2005, even down here where I live now, knew about the Stephen Avery, Teresa Halbach, Brendan Dassey situation. And in Wisconsin, this was a huge case. Media-wise, there was some national coverage, and it was because of the sheer horror that was attached to this. It happened on Halloween. You had a 25-year-old victim burned in a fire. A 16-year-old kid was accused of having a role in the crime. And of course, Stephen Avery, he was the poster child of exonerations back then, after serving 18 years in prison for a crime he didn't commit. So this was big in terms of publicity. And, looking back at it, though, this planting defense was something that stood out to me while I was watching Making a Murderer, because if you remember, you can go back and look at the trial transcripts in this case, and there's nothing that was actually presented at trial that links cops to this planted evidence or all these allegations of planting. Of course, we know Dean Strang and Jerry Buting tried to prove that theory largely through cross-examination, stopping short of accusing police of killing Teresa Halbach. So this was a very puzzling thing for me, but millions of people suddenly believed it. So I vowed to dig into the case more and answer some questions. Now, chief among the questions were why a scent dog didn't hit on Avery's burn pit. That's a big question. There's millions of people that still are convinced that this was a plant job. The evidence was planted. The bones were planted because the dog didn't hit on Avery's burn pit. We're going to get into that. Now, that's according to Making a Murderer. And another question is why the animal did find what appeared to be Teresa Halbach's scent in various other places. According to Making a Murderer, again, there was a strong possibility that the dog actually proves that Teresa Halbach's bones may have been planted in Stephen Avery's fire pit. Now, who is this scent dog anyway? There were several dogs. There was a cadaver dog looking for blood. I believe that was a German Shepherd named Brutus, I believe. But there was also Loof. Loof was a female bloodhound used to track human scent. She was used to track Halbach's scent on the Avery property before the bones were found. Now, we know how the bones were found. It all started with a bone fragment that was stumbled upon by an investigator. Now, this bone fragment was not in the burn pit. It was just beyond the burn pit, and it set off a succession of evidence being found. The car had already been found, and then the bones started to be found in various places, and along with Teresa Halbach's scent. But what was left out of Making a Murderer? Well, let's talk about this in episode 8. Now, if you haven't watched episode 8 of Convicting a Murderer, jump over to DailyWire Plus and then come back and join the conversation here, because this is what we are unpacking today. What was left out? Well, let's start with where this dog actually hit and why this dog appeared to have not hit initially on Stephen Avery's burn pit. I will just say the dog did not hit on Stephen Avery's burn pit initially because the dog did not get close enough to the burn pit. The dog was actually hitting on the burn pit from a ways away. He wanted to get close to the burn pit. Loof did, she did. However, Stephen Avery's dog Bear was protecting that burn pit and protecting that area behind the garage. And Stephen Avery's dog Bear was not a very nice dog. It was not friendly. And they actually kept that dog on the property a little too long. If you watch it in Convicting a Murderer and several other places, I've heard Tom Fassbender say this over the years, that the dog should have been removed before, because they really would have been able to search the property earlier and probably get to these bones. But Bear was a problem. The dogs were kept away. And a matter of fact, deputies wanted no part of Bear either. As a matter of fact, there was one deputy who said he had his gun drawn around Bear in case he was able to lunge at him, while there was an officer searching in an area near where the animal was tied up. But let's talk about Loof. Making a Murderer does talk about the scent, and we touched on that. But let's talk about where this scent started. The scent started, Loof's scent, Teresa Halbach's scent was first detected by Barb Janda's van. This is the van that Stephen Avery wanted to list in the Auto Trader magazine. Then it went to the trailer, right? The back door of the trailer. Now, if you remember what Brendan Dassey said, they carried Teresa Halbach out of the back door. This is where the concrete stairs are. Then they carried her into the garage. First, he said they used a creeper for working on cars, and then he was just kind of vague about how they carried her out. But near the back door, the scent then proceeded to the burn pit, and then the garage, and then, of course, the famous berm near Stephen Avery's home. Of course, from there, the scent went to Cuss Road, the quarry, and around the perimeter of the salvage yard until it stopped at a location where Teresa Halbach's RAV4 was found. Of course, now in Making a Murderer, they suggested that the dog hit on the area over there and by the car crusher. That's actually not accurate. If you look at the case file, you look at some of these reports, it's right there. According to the case reports, according to the investigators, the dog hit right on where Teresa Halbach's car was found by Pam Sturm. Now, this information, again, it's available. And this is what puzzled me as a journalist, is why wasn't this information, because it's public, mind you, detailed in Making a Murderer? In that series, only various parts of Loof's tracking was reported, leading millions of viewers to believe the bloodhound didn't hit on the trailer, the garage, or the fire pit, focusing heavily on the quarry and other areas of Cuss Road. Why? Because Dean Strang and Jerry Buting attempted at trial in open court to confuse the jury into believing that Teresa Halbach was killed away from Avery's trailer on another parcel of land, and burned somewhere else and then transported back. And Making a Murderer did a great job of duping people into believing that. Believe me, because millions of people still believe it. But again, this was public information. Okay, so what we're talking about here. Now, the question is, why did a bloodhound trained to track human scent hit on all of these places? Because that's undeniable. Looking at the case files and comparing it to Making a Murderer, it's undeniable that the dog actually hit on all these places. According to Convicting a Murderer, this is big. According to investigators, including those who made this part of the case in 2005, 18 years ago, and what I mean by making it part of the case is they made it public record. All of this information is out there now because of a crowdfunding effort to obtain this through FOIA. It was all there. I looked at it. I was able to get it very quickly. Again, this is covered in episode 8 that dropped today on DailyWire Plus, Convicting a Murderer. And here it is. Here's the tell. This has to do with Loof. If you want to stay here and then go back and go watch Convicting a Murderer episode 8 after we talk about this, that's fine. That'll work as well. As Teresa Halbach's body was burning, her ashes, meaning what was left of her muscle, cartilage, hair, organs, and skin, were being blown all over the Avery salvage yard and beyond. Ashes collected on the berm, in the pond, in the quarry, and on Cuss Road. This is why the Bloodhound's handler, former police officer Sarah Fauski, stopped as Luth kept circling the berm and the ponds and told investigators, quote, "She's here."
She just kept on zigzagging up and down this berm, up and down this berm. Shepherdson, who was with me, we were both floored because her indication, her animation up on this berm. I remember looking at him going, I found her. She's here.
Now, speaking of fire, I dug into this years ago, and I focused a lot of my reporting on Avery's stories about the fire because, of course, you know they were inconsistent. I didn't have a fire. I didn't burn anything maybe 2 weeks ago. I haven't burned anything in the burn barrel. Who knows when last time I did it, but I didn't do it this week. These were the stories that Avery said. Avery gave to police. Okay, so in short, he initially denied having a fire. But let's review the conflicting stories that Avery told about the fire. Now, you remember now that this, in Making a Murderer, was a big one. It's a big one because millions of people still believe that all of the testimony, all of the witness testimony regarding this fire was all fabricated. It was all made up. And, of course, Blaine Dassey came forward several years later and said, I made all that up. I just lied because police made me lie. And, I didn't see a fire. The fire was just small. But regardless, folks, if the flames were 15 feet high or 3 feet high or 5 feet high, these witnesses claim to have seen Stephen Avery standing by a fire on October 31st, 2005, and witness testimony is evidence. Okay, and if you look at this, now, Stephen Avery was going to run, I reported that Stephen Avery was going to run, according to investigators, Stephen Avery was going to run with the theory that he never saw Teresa Halbach on October 31st. She never showed up. Matter of fact, he called Auto Trader and said, hey, send her some other day because she didn't show up yesterday. That kind of thing. Okay, but the fire is something that Stephen Avery also had inconsistent stories about. In terms of Teresa not showing up, according to prosecutors, Ken Kratz told me this, Stephen Avery was, according to Ken Kratz, Stephen Avery was going to stick with that theory until he realized Bobby Dassey saw Teresa Halbach. In terms of the fire, there's another person who Stephen Avery suddenly realizes saw that fire. This is before trial. This is before Avery knew anything about who was talking to the police, who was talking about a fire, but he realized that the fire was something somebody saw.
Yeah, and I didn't have no fire there all week.
I only remember that Monday night.
The Monday night before that.
The day I went up to the hospital with Scott to see his mom. That day.
What day was that?
That was a Monday.
The 31st? Yeah, but I didn't have no fire there then. Not no Monday night.
Yeah, I think he did.
Now, just to review, Avery said that Teresa Halbach took pictures of Barb's van at between, quote, 2 and 2:30, spending 5 minutes before driving away. According to Avery, he then put the Auto Trader magazine he says Halbach gave to him on his desk, with plans to go over and see nephew Bobby Dassey, who appeared to be home next door at his sister Barb's house. However, he then realized Bobby left, so he went back into his trailer and at some point claims his mother brought him his mail. Now let's review. In one version of the story, Avery says he went to Barb's house later that day to see a deer someone killed and that Bobby Dassey claimed from the road. He spoke to ex-fiancée Jody twice, once at 8:57 p.m., telling investigator Mark Wiegert that he was home watching TV when he received the second call. Avery says after the call, he watched quote-unquote sex programs, pornography, before going to bed or falling asleep at 10:30 at night. Now, however, according to the call at 8:57, now this is not in Making a Murderer, by the way, but according to this call, or in this call, Avery tells Jody he is, quote, end quote, working outside, end quote, cleaning up the yard a bit. He also mentions the golf cart, the same one Dassey said they used to gather things for the fire, including tires, an old car seat, branches, and we'll get to that.
This call is subject to monitoring and recording. Thank you for using Evercom.
I love of my life.
Is this the first time it rang?
No. I'm just working out here. What the fuck I do with my soda? Oh, it's over there by the golf cart. Yeah, I'm cleaning up the yard a little bit.
Avery is not inside his trailer when Jody calls from jail at 8:57 p.m. Now, but Avery sticks to that story about the 8:57 call. He tells Uyghur just before he's arrested another twist to the story, and that is that he saw the deer in Barb's garage on Friday, November 4th, not October 31st. Now, let's talk about the fire. The October 31st fire. We know Stephen Avery denied having the fire, starting with his November 5th and 6th interviews with Marinette County investigators in Crivets. He maintained that claim until after he's arrested, when he finally admits to it. Now, this is when Barb, during a phone call, reveals to Avery that he had a fire, and this is the first time Brendan Dassey comes in to the story. Here is the second part of that call regarding Dassey.
The 31st? Yeah, but I didn't have no fire there then. Not no Monday night.
Yeah, I think you did. Because when we came home at 8 o'clock, you were standing outside by the fire.
But Brendan was with me.
Now, Stephen Avery is not the only one who initially denied having a Halloween bonfire. Brendan Dassey started his interaction with police by saying a bonfire scheduled for Thursday, November 3rd had been canceled. Of course, we know that Dassey initially said he saw Teresa Halbach taking pictures when he got home from school at 3:45 p.m. and then saw her leave. He then said that was a lie, eventually telling Tony O'Neill that 2 or 3 hours after Halbach left the property, Avery asked him to help him move a vehicle into his garage, which investigators believe was Avery's Suzuki SUV. He moved out in order to fit Halbach's RAV4 inside. It's believed the Suzuki was pushed back in after Avery and Dassey hid the RAV4, as Avery and Dassey told police, down the road by the car crusher. Dassey eventually admits to the fire, by the way, along with his role in the murder, to his mother, Barb Janda, now Todic, on recorded jail calls. Here's one of them.
What about when I got home at 5? You were here.
Yeah?
Yeah. When did you go over there?
Well, I went over there earlier and then came home before you did.
Why didn't you say something to me then?
I don't know, I was too scared.
You wouldn't have had to been scared because I would have called 911 and you wouldn't have been going back over there. They would have been here. Maybe she would have been alive yet. So in those statements, you did all that to her too?
Some of it.
Did he make you do it?
Yeah.
Of course, Stephen Avery still maintains he was framed by law enforcement, that he could not have killed the 25-year-old photographer, as the state claimed at trial, because she left the property after spending only a few minutes taking pictures. Now, let's take another dive into Stephen Avery's story that Teresa Halbach never showed up. According to at least one Auto Trader employee, Avery called the publication between 4:30 and 5 p.m. November 3rd, the day Halbach was reported missing, and asked to reschedule his appointment because Teresa was a no-show. Manitowoc County Lieutenant Andrew Colburn would later testify that later that day, Avery told him that Halbach was on the property at around 2:30 and that he never spoke to her. The reason for the puzzling call to Auto Trader may lie in the period between when it was made and Stephen Avery's first meeting with police. Here's from an interview I did with Ken Kratz. Quote, "The story was going to be that she never showed up. That changes the first time he realizes Bobby Dassey saw her. He realizes after talking to Bobby and Barb that Bobby Dassey saw her taking photos, that Bobby Dassey saw her walking towards the trailer." Now, Bobby Dassey testified that he was about to take a shower when he saw Teresa Halbach photograph his mother's van, and then when he got out of the shower, walked towards Avery's trailer. When he left to go bow hunting a few minutes later, he saw Teresa Halbach's SUV, but he did not see Avery or Teresa Halbach. Avery told Marinette County Sheriff's Detective Anthony O'Neill on November 6, 2005, that he spoke to Bobby, who lived in Barb's house next door, at around 11 o'clock or noon. After Halbach left at around 2:30 p.m., Avery said he went to his trailer, placed a copy of the Auto Trader magazine on his computer, and went to talk to Bobby again, but of course he wasn't there. Now, Bobby Dassey testified that he slept until 2 o'clock that day and never mentioned talking to Avery at all. It can be gleaned that Bobby Dassey was asleep at around 11 or noon when Avery claims that they had an interaction. Bobby Dassey and Scott Todick have both been named by attorney Kathleen Zellner as potential suspects in the Halbach killing. We know that by now. Both men are now publicly accused of murder. Zellner claims both men lied on the stand during Avery's trial. Dassey about not seeing Teresa Halbach leave the property, and Todick about Avery's bonfire. Zellner claims Bobby told his older brother Brian that he saw Teresa drive away, a claim that he refutes. Now, here's another comment from Ken Kratz from the 2017 interview I did. Quote, Bobby was pressured by the family before he even testified, but he was unwilling to change his testimony that not only did he observe Teresa Halbach, but that he observed her walking toward the trailer before he took a shower, and that her car was still at the Avery location when he leaves for hunting. But she was nowhere in sight. Bobby was a family member who was not trying to implicate anyone. In fact, he would have rather not have been involved, end quote. Avery also did not mention a bonfire during his November 6th interview and initially denied there were burn barrels on the property. It wasn't until O'Neill asked him where the burn barrels were near his home did he acknowledge them. It's been 2 weeks since he burned anything in the barrels, Avery said. Avery told Calumet County investigator Mark Wiegert on November 9th that he had burned old tires and some brush near his garage a week before Halloween, but nothing the week Teresa Halbach went missing. While his statements were slightly inconsistent, Scott Todick actually testified to seeing a bonfire behind Avery's garage twice on October 31st. He saw the fire when he picked up Barb to go to Green Bay to visit his mother who was in the hospital, and he saw the fire again when he dropped Barb off. And the second time he actually saw one of Barb's sons, who later was identified as Brendan Dassey, standing next to Stephen Avery next to the fire. Of course, early on in the story, Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey claimed that Brendan was home at 9 o'clock. He told police something else during his confession. And Avery says, of course, that he went to sleep after receiving the call from Jody. But we now heard the jail call that was left out of Making a Murderer. Of course, Jody was in the Manitowoc County Jail serving time for drunk driving. Both men, Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey, are serving life sentences. Avery without parole. So we now know about Luke the Bloodhound. There was actually another dog on that property that during the same time Luke was searching for Teresa Halbach's scent. But a German Shepherd, folks, was actually on the property as well and hit on several places in the trailer looking for blood. But of course, investigators believe that Stephen Avery cleaned the floors and cleaned up the area quite extensively with a carpet cleaner, and the bedding was burned, according to investigators. But there were more dogs there, and of course this was not in Convicting a Murderer, and it also was not in Making a Murderer, but the information is in the case file, folks, that a German Shepherd trained to track blood, was inside Stephen Avery's trailer, and it hit on several places, including the laundry room and Avery's bedroom. But folks, that is the end of our time together today. Convicting a Murderer episode 8 is out, and according to producers of the program, this is a big one. Jump over there, DailyWire Plus. We will see you next time. And speaking of time, have a good time looking all of this up on Al Gore's Internet Machine.